Hi, good morning. All right, welcome to Beach Church. My name is Michael. If you don't know who I am the serve pastor here at Beach. And so we're excited for you all to be here. If you notice, we are in the middle of a series right now on Jesus. It's on who is Jesus, what did he mean to the world, not just for us who are considered followers of Jesus, but what did he mean to the world, no matter what way we view who this person was. We're still talking about him 2,000 years ago. So no matter what, we all have a working definition of who this person is and was. So this is where we're going to start. We all are inundated. We spend a lot of time probably on the internet for a variety of reasons. How many of you ever found yourself watching YouTube videos and then you're like, I'm going to watch a video or two, and then you look up and it's been 3 hours later? And then you're like, if you're me, you start second guessing your life decisions at that point. But you watch all these, all right, so how many of you seen these videos? And I remember when they first came out, but now you can see them of all different kinds. But it's basically a military family, and then there's whichever spouse, whether it's the mom or dad who's been serving overseas, and they come back and surprise their family at some kind of event. How many of you seen those videos before? Okay, they're pretty common now. Now, here's the second question. How many of you seen those videos and at least teared up a little bit? Okay. Right, so something to know about me, I can watch a lot of different stuff. I'm one of the least emotional people you'll ever meet, okay? So it takes a lot to get me to cry about stuff. That has nothing to do with like, oh, I'm a man and I don't cry. It's just who I am. And whenever I mention that, it's always like, hey, anybody in the crowd who has counseling in their background is like getting a card out for me afterward. It's okay. My wife is finishing up her degree in psychology. She's got me covered. We'll get it sorted out someday. All right, but that's just who I am. It takes a lot to get me there. But why is it, you ever thought about this? Why is it, because especially most of the time we're watching those videos, we don't necessarily know the people in the video at all. But for some reason we have this reaction because we see this overwhelming flow of emotion from especially the kids. Now, before I was a parent, that didn't mean a whole lot to me. It's usually like just the overwhelming of the emotion. But now as a parent, you especially see it on the kids, and it just gets to you. You just start going for it. But even if you don't know the people, why is it that we have such a strong reaction to seeing, to us, strangers, just be surprised? And yet it leads us to that. Now, we're here in Jacksonville, and not too far from us is a big naval station, and we as Beach Church have a partnership with the USO out there. So I know that there are several military families that even attend this church and go through that on a daily basis. And here's the thing. I've spent time in missions prior to this, and so I have some kind of working understanding of kind of what you guys go through. So what you do is amazing. And most of us don't understand what you go through on a daily basis, especially when a spouse is gone for such a long time and you're holding down the fort for so long. So thank you for not only what you do, but also for, going through that, and hopefully we can be of help as well as Beach Church and through our partnership with the USO and serve those who are in that position. But I think this is what it comes down to. I believe that when we look at those videos, the reason why we have such a strong reaction is because we see someone else who is sacrificing so much, not for themselves, but for other people, right? There's not a lot of benefit that comes from the sacrifice as far as their family. A military family gives up a lot in order for a parent to be in active service, a lot. And I don't think they get nearly as much back out of that just for themselves. But we recognize that their sacrifice also means something for each of us. And that's where the connection point comes for us. That's the connection of the emotion that we have. And that's because we value those who give of themselves to others, right? It doesn't matter if you're here and you're a follower of Jesus or not. We all share the value of service, of giving. Even in our communities, we value of volunteering and giving of our time and our finances. All around us, we're kind of saturated with this idea, right? If you think of like any business in our community, any business that we would consider a good business has some sort of money that's being taken out of the business and given to somebody in the community or some charity, some kind of function. That's just normal for us, right? You go to Walmart, you go to the place where everybody brings their presents back every year after Christmas, that little spot. And then you look over on the wall, though, and there's like, hey, here's the local charities that we give money to, right? And we look at that and we're like, okay, and we don't think twice about it, but that's normal, right? Right next door, we have Sago. If you haven't met Sago, been over there, go over there. 25% of their profits go toward a local charity of some kind. But that's normal for us, right? Not only that, but no matter who you are, you probably have spent some time volunteering to some kind of organization, giving money of some kind to somebody. It's all around us. But here's the thing. Where did that come from? How did we get to a place in society where that's normal? Because what we're going to look at is that 2,000 years ago, when a person named Jesus came onto the scene of the earth, none of those things existed. There was nothing like that in culture. In all of the examples I just gave, none of that was happening. Okay? You go back 2,000 years ago, we're right in the midst of the Roman Empire. Okay? If you are in the Roman Empire, which if you look at it on the maps, this is a span of land that goes from Europe and North Africa all the way across through the Middle East and on into around where Iran is today. That much. Now, they believe that 2/3 of the people that lived in this time period in the Roman Empire were slaves. Okay, so like if we watch movies, a lot of times we get like these people who are in toga parties all the time and they sit around and speak philosophy. And okay, that was like extremely small amount of the population in the Roman Empire. The vast 2/3 of the people are slaves. If you weren't a slave, more likely you're somebody who was just living day to day, and not like our living day to day, like living day to day as in if you didn't work that day, you might not be alive tomorrow. That kind of living day to day. If you were born into poverty, which was very highly likely, it was very likely you would continue in poverty and then die in poverty. There was very little movement as far as people go. If you were someone in power, then you used that power to make sure you stayed in power. Like even the guy who was kind of ruling the area that Jesus came back into the area of Jerusalem and around that, he was a guy that would kill anyone who got in his way of being the king in that area. Not only that, but he would even just preemptively go, you know what, I think that person is possibly going to think about messing with my kingship. So he would just go ahead and get rid of you ahead of time. That was normal. Okay, no one would even think twice about a ruler doing something like that because it was just so normal. And up until that point, even if you look before the Roman Empire, we had been in a cycle in human history where basically all it was different nations becoming bigger and bigger and getting better at oppressing people and ruling larger amounts of people. That was it. There wasn't like a progression of good things happening in the world. We just got better and better at killing people and taking land. That was it. And then right in the midst of this comes Jesus. Amongst a very tiny people group, the Jewish people group, that to the Romans meant nothing. They could care less about this little tiny people other than they were in a piece of land that was really vital for them. So they took it. Now, when the Romans normally come in, they would try to force you could keep whatever amount of worship you wanted, but you just also had to worship their gods plus their emperor. They needed your allegiance to them. Now, that worked everywhere else except for the Jewish people. They were kind of a people that knew that they had no inclination to worship anybody else but their God. Okay, so every time the Romans tried to do this, the Jews would pick a fight with the Romans, knowing that they had no way of winning that. But they would rather thousands of them die than actually give in to worshiping something else. That's the state of life when Jesus comes into the world. Okay, so then we go from that to by the end of Jesus' life, and then he's crucified, dead, resurrected, and it's immediately after, you have people who are Jewish, who were those people who would not worship anyone else, now going out and willing to die for a person they call Jesus, who they say is God. Okay, now think of how drastic of a convincing event in history had to happen for this people group to go from willing to die from worshiping anybody else to this in such a quick span. That's how quick it shifted. Okay, but we went from that 2,000 years ago to that's what life looked like to all the things we just talked about at the beginning of now. Now we're just like, you're not a good person in our society unless you do something for somebody else. That's just normal. Whether you're in church or not, it doesn't matter. We all value it. You would have to give of something. I remember there's even like TV shows where people are doing their taxes and they realize at the end of the year, I haven't given anything this year to anybody. And they're like, oh, that looks horrible. Like, we're bad people. And then they figure out how to do it. We have this built in us. But here's my proposition to you, that we didn't just progress for 2,000 years and finally figured out how to be generous to people. That there was an event in history by a person in history named Jesus who started a movement that has transformed our world for 2,000 years to the point where now generosity, serving, and giving is normal for us. And now, it's not normal everywhere. I've traveled enough around the world to know that places that have never had a strong movement of Christianity, where what I've described in the Roman Empire it's not too far off today. There is a difference. But in our culture, in our society, that is what we have been completely transformed by. Today we have not just government programs, we have nonprofits, we have people. For us at Beach Church, we have 10 mission partners locally that we partner with, all serving different types of people in the community that are in need of some kind. So like even just a few blocks from here, we have Mission House, who does amazing work with helping those who are homeless or are on the streets and have various needs, to not just meeting their need, but even programs to help them get off the streets and get into work and find a place to live. They have a whole system for how they help people do that, and they're very successful at it. Right here in this room, right over here, is where Beach's Community Kitchen runs, that serves meals to those in the community in need. We have the Ark, that is also not but a few streets inland. How many of you have understood what the Ark is or met them? Okay, they're amazing people. They've taken people who have varying disabilities and have created this whole community for them to have what we would consider a normal life and be able to contribute and work and have some decency in their life. If you were someone in that position 2,000 years ago in the Roman Empire, you would be killed at birth for the fact that you didn't provide any value for people. That was the norm. Nowadays, that's completely different. We have whole batches of work that's done to help people in that position. What about today? We know that we have people who are leaders and in power that mess up, that misuse their power. Okay, so that's not necessarily a thing that doesn't happen anymore. But what is the response from society when someone who's in power misuses their power? Okay, you see it on the news for weeks. Now, depending on who it is, you might hear it for months. It's not that people aren't abusing their power, but it's understood that that's not meant to happen. That's our understanding. Whereas in 2,000 years ago, it's like, well, if you had the chance to get there, you'd do it too. That was how it worked. That was how the world worked. Nowadays, we value people who use power to give to other people, to serve other people. It's really hard for us in our context to go back so far to think of a world that was so different. And even think of this, this part of the world was considered one of the most civilized in the world. When you got outside the Roman Empire, not that there weren't other variations of this kind of thing, but it was understood that it only got worse from there in a lot of other places. Okay, so it would have been a very brutal, chaotic world to live in. And here comes a person named Jesus, who comes to one of the only people groups, probably the only people group in the world that actually already valued service. Even the God in the Old Testament was telling his people that sometimes they felt like they were doing okay, but he would point out to them, hey, you're not serving the poor or the widow or the orphan in your society. And he would point that out to them and say, what you're doing is not complete because you're not taking care of other people. It was one of the only people groups in the world at that time that valued that. And Jesus steps into that role. And in the midst of this chaos and death in society, he's walking around healing people, feeding people, pointing out people who are on the edges of society, looking them in the eye and saying that God sees you. That was what he came on the earth and did. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to look at two quick stories, two quick passages. We're going to look first at what's the description of what he did, and then what does that mean for those who consider themselves followers, and how did it change our world? Okay, so the first one we're going to go to is in a letter written by Paul. It's the book of Philippians. Okay, so we're going to go to Philippians, and it's chapter 2, and we're going to look at just a few verses. So this is verses 5 through 11. How many of you remember from English class, there's a thing called a thesis statement? Right? If you've had trauma from English class, I'm sorry I just brought up English class in church, okay? But the thesis statement it's just really just saying this is what the whole thing's about, right? If you want to summarize the whole letter, here you go. Here's the spot. Go to here. You'll get the whole gist of it. All right, these verses we're about to read is Paul's thesis statement of this book. Now, to get a little context, Paul is in prison at this point in time when he writes this letter. Okay, he's in prison because he's a Christian, and what he's doing is against the Roman Empire because he's leading people to not follow the Roman emperor and their gods and saying there's a different way to live life. So he's writing from prison to a church that's in a city called Philippi, and they're also being persecuted for also being Christian. So everything we read, think about that's what's going on while this is being written. That's his message. Okay, now, also to forewarn you, when I read and teach, so that means I'm a start-stopper, okay? So if you're like, all right, let's just get with the story. I'm sorry, I'm going to frustrate you. Bear with me. We'll get there. All right, Philippians chapter 2. We're going to start in verse 5. Verse 5 says, have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus. Okay, we're going to stop already. Because in my former life, I was a journalist, and so I like asking questions. So after I get done with this sentence, I'm like, what does he mean by have this mind? I feel like when I read that, there's no way I can walk away from that having a concrete way of saying, oh, I know what he's talking about. So if you dig a little bit, and you know that the original pieces of the Bible are written in different languages, so they're translated into English. Okay, the original part of the New Testament is Greek. This word that's for mind, right? So it's mind. In other parts of the letter, it's translated as think. Okay, for us, a lot of times, if we just read that, we're thinking, oh, if you just get your head right, you think the right things, that's what he's talking about. It's not. Okay, this word mind, so I'm going to teach it to you because I'm a Bible nerd, and that's what I do. So the word here is called phroneo. Okay, so pronounce that with me, phroneo. There you go. Take that with you. Impress your friends. You learned that this morning. Phroneo, what it means is not just how you think. It is what it means is your entire direction in life. It's a life orientation towards something. So when he says have this life orientation, he means basically have the same orientation of your life that Jesus showed us to have. Okay, now if you're in prison or if you're being persecuted, it makes sense, right? Because they're on the track from where Jesus was headed. So he says that's what verse 5 is. Then he goes into starting verse 6. Who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. Okay, he says Jesus, who, though he was God, he basically, as he looked down on the world and said, look at the chaos and death that we have created. And he said, you know what, I'm not just going to say, hey, you guys need to fix your mess. What he did is he actually became a fully human being and entered into the mess that we had created so that he could be the solution to that and then show us how to live a different life. He's a ruler that comes down and gets in the midst of it and shows us how to do it by doing it first himself. Okay, so that's what Paul's getting at here. So verse 8. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. It says the beauty of who Jesus was as the one who God has exalted to be the ruler, the one who's the rightful ruler, is the one who is willing to die for the people who were called his followers. The way of the world at the time of Jesus was that leaders told their followers, you go and die for me. You go and die at my bidding. Jesus says the way that he leads us to is that I come and die for my followers first. And then we go and give of ourselves. That's what he did. He was given the name above every name. Now what Paul is making a high statement here, because what he's saying is that the name of Jesus even goes above the name of the one who rules the empire at the time. If you have a name above every name, that means that name is meant to be worshipped above Caesar Augustus or whoever the emperor was at the time, which was a treasonous claim. This is why Paul's in prison, because he's telling people there's a different rightful ruler of our lives. And it is not the ruler in this world. It is not the ones who rule by power. It's the one who showed us what true power is, who gave himself for us. That's what the Philippians 2, 5 through 11 gets to. Now, this wasn't just, not just the act of Jesus, but then as we move through history, you see that the people who were impacted by this, who then live this out, are the ones that we can trace back and see they are the ones that change history. Even in the past 150 years, we have more than enough examples, but I'm going to pinpoint 2 examples of people who took the teaching of Jesus and actually made massive transformation in societies. One is actually a person who was Hindu. His name was Mahatma Gandhi. You may have learned of Gandhi in school at one point. All right, Gandhi was a Hindu that was a leader in India, but actually left India for a time and studied in London, became friends with a man who was Christian, and his friend basically got him to commit to reading the Bible while he was in London. And Gandhi himself said, I pretty much just agreed to it because he was my friend. That's the only reason why he agreed to do it. But he did it. And he said he was so impacted by the person of Jesus that he actually started incorporating the life and testimony and even the willing to suffer like Jesus did into who he was. And so what he did is he went back to India and put that into practice. And actually what he did is led the Indian nation out from under the rule of the British. Just from going, not only teaching what was true, but then being willing to suffer and die for others was what led the movement. Now for us, we have a much closer one, which we just celebrated not but less than 2 weeks ago, which was Dr. Martin Luther King, a man who was a reverend, who was a man of God, who taught basically the truth of the Bible and incorporated also who Jesus was into how do we change the world. And what he did was he taught all of the people who were within the civil rights movement that was kind of within his realm that, we will go out and we will protest, but at the same time, we will never retaliate against anyone that does something to us. We will go and we will represent what we believe is truth to lead freedom for our people, but we will never fight power with the same power. We will fight that power by giving ourselves, and if it means that we die, then that's what it means, because that's the example that Jesus gave us. And actually, many people did die doing that very thing. But it was the fact that they were willing to do that transformed the hearts of our nation, that it led to the end of the segregation laws. And we have a lot of ways that we can go at this point, but the fact that we have modern day examples of people who literally took even a portion of who Jesus was and put it into practice and it led to freedom shows us that by one person who is definitely a preacher, a minister, and one who is Hindu, it is truth regardless of which way you go for it. And that's what it shows us. So this is what Jesus did. And the thing that Philippians 2, the point that we get to from it is that Jesus didn't come to play a role for our example, but became the very essence of a servant in his life. Jesus didn't just come and say, all right, I'm going to show you a good little example. This is, and play a role. He was a servant. meaning we get the definition for what a servant is from him. It wasn't like we knew what a servant was and then we're like, oh, Jesus matches that description. No, we didn't have a good working definition of what it meant to live as a servant, and Jesus set that definition with his life that we now understand as normal. Okay, now let's go to the second set, which we're going to flip over to one of the Gospels. We're going to go to the Gospel of John, okay, because this is a great story. You probably are mostly all familiar with this. It's a very common story. It's the story of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. But it's in John chapter 13, and it's verses 1 to 17. So again, we'll read this through. I'll stop here and there. But here, we're starting in verse 1. It was just before the Passover festival, and Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Okay, again, I got to stop you. First verse. This is setting the stage of Jesus saying he knows his time is coming to an end. His time is almost up. He is about to die. Now, when anyone is about to die, what do you think are the information that you share with people? Is it like, hey, Bob, what's going to be what's the weather tomorrow look like? I'm not going to be here, but you will, so. No, you don't talk about, you talk about important stuff. Right? Anyone would do that. You're going to say anything that has been left unsaid, anything that's vital for the people that you're leaving behind to understand. So this whole story is with Jesus in his mind saying, this is almost it, and they need to get this. Not just them, but then we today need to get this. So verse 2. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Okay, so Jesus takes off his outer cloak, okay? So that means, just for your reference, he does have an inner cloak still on, okay? Takes off an outer cloak. And he gets a basin of water, comes over, lines up his disciples, his followers. He starts washing feet, all right? Now, I'll tell you what. Invite people over your house to a dinner and then whip out a basin of water and say, all right, guys, get those shoes off. I'm going to wash those for you. That's the quickest way to kill a dinner party, okay? It's not normal for us, okay? This is a very common first century thing, okay? Because pretty much everyone walking around at that time have, at best, good sandals on, or it's just something makeshift that helps them walk around, all right? So your feet get really dirty all the time. So in order to show hospitality to any guest that comes to your house, you would have a servant there that one of their first jobs was to wash people's feet when they came in. It was just an act of hospitality to people. Okay, but normally the master of the house would have the servant come and do that. Jesus instead starts to flip the whole idea. He himself walks over and grabs the stuff that the servant is supposed to do and starts lining up his disciples to do it. Okay, that's where we're headed in the story. Okay, then we get some conversation with Peter starting in verse 6. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? And Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand. No, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. And Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. All right, this is where we're talking about, it's starting to flip Peter out, okay? Because his leader, his master, is now trying to do something to him that is supposed to be for a servant, someone who's beneath him. And that there's nothing in Peter's mind that that's going to compute with. And he's saying, no, I'm the follower, you're the leader. You're not this is not how this works. Okay, so that's Peter's problem right now, is that that's not how this is supposed to happen, and he's not going to take a part in it. Okay, but then Jesus replies, verse 9, Peter says, then Lord, Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. Verse 10, Jesus answered, those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you. Okay, so So he's like, he goes from no to Jesus saying, well, if you don't do this, you don't have a part in me. He goes, fine then. Yeah, let's go for it. Feet, hands, head, everything. All right, Jesus says back, he's like, Peter, that's called a bath. Okay? Not giving you a bath. It's not what we're doing. Just need the feet. Okay? So again, you can find humor in nearly every biblical story somewhere. All right? Because Peter's just all for it. He's an all or nothing guy. And Jesus is like, all right, we can play, we can do this. Verse 11. For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I've done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you'll be blessed if you do them. Jesus says, in order, I am here and I'm showing you how you are now to live. Paul pointed out in Philippians that this is what Jesus did for us, and that is our life orientation. John points out in this story through Jesus' teaching that in order to be called his follower, you are meant to be a servant, that we are meant to follow the footsteps of Jesus and serve others. He's saying, I am about to go. My time is almost done. And just as you call me Lord and Master and Teacher, if I got on my hands and knees and washed your feet, then now you go and do the same for others. Now, we may not wash anybody's feet in our life, but Jesus isn't making a literal example of that. But what he's saying is that when we go out every day, we go out in order to metaphorically wash people's feet. We go to show hospitality. We go to serve others through every single day, through the opportunities he's given us. That is what it means to live as the example of Jesus. And let's be honest, our world needs more examples of who Jesus was and less opinion about who Jesus was. We need to go out and actually be able to live this. That's what Jesus asks us to do. If you are a follower of Jesus, you're called to live a life of serving. Now, let me tell you about myself, because this is how this is kind of played out in my life. I became a Christian when I was 22 years old. I grew up in Tennessee. I'm a proud Tennessee Volunteers fan, so every time I'm up here, you'll hear me say that. Wow, first service got way stronger reaction. There's stronger Gator fans in the first service. All right. Florida State, I guess you guys are more neutral with that, but all right. So grew up in Tennessee. I didn't necessarily grow up in a family that was a church-going family, although, we grew up still around, everything. So it's not like it was a foreign concept for us, but became a Christian at 22. Sarah and I, my wife, we started, as soon as we became a Christian, we started reading the Bible together, because for us, we were very simple with it. We were like, we didn't have people to go to ask questions necessarily, but we're like, at least we've probably got to read this thing. That's probably got to be a part of this whole idea. So we had no clue what we were doing, so we went out and bought those Bible in a year things, it breaks it up for you. Read Old Testament, New Testament, Psalm. They throw a psalm in there every now and then. So we're going through that. We got about a month in, and we got to, for me, the impactful chapter that has been a lot in my life was Matthew chapter 9. And Matthew chapter 9 has a simple story where Jesus is out with his disciples, and everybody in the New Testament were farmers, so every metaphor is a farming metaphor practically. So he's talking about the harvest, and he's referencing actually what does it mean that there's lots of people out in the world that need service, that need our message. And he says that there's plenty of people in the world that need this, but there's so few people willing to go do it. That's the essence of the story that he tells. And so I'm sitting there this morning, and the way the story ends is he just says, pray that there'll be more people to go and do this. Okay, so again, black and white thinker that I am, I'm sitting there going, all right, so that was my morning quiet time prayer as I started praying for people to go and do what Jesus said to do. So as through my prayer that without having a clear definition for how this works, knew in my heart without a doubt that instead of asking somebody else to go and do this, I knew that God was just saying, instead of asking other people, why don't you just go do it? That was kind of it. It was clear to me at that point. And so, but that's not necessarily like, putting your house up for sale, jumping ship on everything and going out and, being a missionary. That's not always something you bring up right away to your spouse who may not be in the same spot of life. So I waited a few days because I'm like, I don't know how this is going to plan out. But hey, it seems simple enough because again, simple everything. So I waited 3 days and then I finally brought it up and me and Sarah talked about it and she's like, that's fine because 3 days ago, God, I feel like said the same thing to me. So then that was it. We just decided it ended up being about 11 months. We kind of put our house up for sale and took care of our stuff. And then we joined a missions organization from that point on and did that for 10 years. And so here's the key that I want to bring out of that is that there's not once out of all that in my life that you would say pinpointed me to be someone in ministry or to be a missionary. And to be honest with you, if you want to know what makes a missionary, there's nothing special about us. It's just that we're willing to say yes to crazier stuff with less information than other people. That's it. Most of the time we're like, yeah, I'll do that. And then we're like, all right, how do we do that? And then we figure it out as we go. That's how it works. But that's the key here. It's not about our qualifications. You can't go to my hometown, and I guarantee you're probably not going to find anybody that would say, hey, I watched that kid as a child, and yeah, I knew he'd turn out that way. That's not going to be there, all right? It's not about, because I had no background. It's not about your background. It's not about your qualifications. It's not about what you can, what skills you can bring. It literally comes down to, do you know what you're meant to do and called to do, and are you willing to say yes to Jesus to do it? That's it. And when we're talking about Jesus as a servant, I believe that what he asks us to do is to go and be servants in the world. That's our daily calling, no matter who we are. And that literally means saying yes to him day to day in whatever he brings across. It becomes easy for us to think that serving is something that we have to go and find, or that it's a separate thing on our schedule somewhere. But service is a lifestyle. Service is an attitude in our heart. It's how we treat the people we come across. It's how do we interact with the person who's our cashier that morning. It's how do we, if we're coaching T-ball, how do we interact with the kids and the parents that we're there with every day? It's in all those little things, because it's not about whether you join into, we call it full-time ministry or not. We are all created to be servants. And you'll hear it every time from us. Every week, our motto, which is that we exist here at Beach to reach, raise up, and release followers of Jesus to change the world, right? Carrie reiterated that. That's what we hear every week, because that's why we exist here. Now, how many of you get to that and to change the world part, and then you're like, I'm out. Right? It's such a big task. If we think about it as like this whole thing. Now, we don't necessarily walk out of here going, yes, I tomorrow am going to change the planet. Right? It's a big, huge thing. Here's what we need to think of it as. There's already been a person that existed that already changed the whole planet. And we don't have to fulfill that role. He has done that. His name is Jesus. But how can we go out this week and each one of us change our world? There's already people in your lives. There are your people you work with, your family, the people you interact with everywhere you go that need people to serve them, that need someone to listen to them, that need someone to show compassion to them. That is what it means to serve. And when every person in here walks out and does that, how much different could Jacksonville look? How much different could our local communities look if we walked out and did that? I think that that's what Jesus means. We're not asking to go out and be a Dr. Martin Luther King or a Gandhi or anybody else in history. He's called you to be you and to change your world. So how do you do that? Who are the people in your life that you know right now that God is, and Jesus is saying, say yes to serving this person? If we talk about people, I probably guarantee you may have somebody that's come into your mind since we've been talking. There's somebody in your life that you know needs that person, whatever it can look like. How do you walk out this week and do something for that person in the love of Jesus? How do you do something in your household and beyond? It's not about finding more stuff. There's other times, though, that we also do this together, right? So like next Sunday, we get the opportunity for all of us to come together and do this as a corporate entity. And we get to come together and serve together to show someone who's been impacted by cancer and say, we see you. We're here just for that reason, that you're not alone in this. If we accomplish that, that's showing the light and love of Jesus. That's what it means to be for the beaches, is that we can go out and say to people who feel like they've been left out or feel like that they're suffering and they don't know why, that there's someone in the community that says, I see you and I care. And we want to be that church here. That's what we exist to do. So how can you do that today? How do we leave here and be the church when we leave this building? Because we do church on Sundays, and then Monday through Saturday, we go and be the church to others. How do you do that? How is Jesus asking you to walk out and do that? So as we're singing this last song, I want you to not just to worship, but also be inviting God to show you how does that practically work. Whether you need to come up and pray and have someone even pray for you, whether it's your section leader or one of the prayer team, or whether it's just right there in your seat, it doesn't matter. As long as you're seeking, where do I need to say yes this week? So I'm going to pray for us and do that this last song. So you can walk out of here knowing this is how I can change my world that I'm in. God, we just thank you for this day, and I pray that you give us each a way for us to walk out and fulfill what you've asked us to do. Pray that you help open our eyes to the people in our life that need us to see them as opportunities to show love and compassion and serve them like you would want us to serve them. I just pray, God, that you help us to see those opportunities and even bring new ones into our lives so where we can continue to reach out and to raise up and release your followers to change our worlds together. In Jesus' name, amen.